cold bit into her skin before anything else registered. Ryuko's eyes cracked open to darkness, cut by surgical lamps, their glare sterile and pitiless. The air tasted wrong chemical and dead like breathing rust through a cloth soaked in embalming fluid. She tried to move and found herself strapped to a metal slab, wrists and ankles locked down with restraints that bit through the torn remains of what used to be her school uniform. The ceiling above stretched into industrial gloom, crossed by pipes and cables that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. Somewhere in that mechanical warren, servos whined and data streams chattered in binary cant. The sound scraped against her ears like nails on chalkboard. She pulled against the restraints. The metal creaked but held, again harder. The bolts anchoring the straps to the table groaned in protest but refused to give. Her muscles felt like wet sand, exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical fatigue. Something had drained her, pulled at the core of her strength until only dregs remained. "Senketsu," she said, voice hoarse. "You there?" Silence answered. Not the comfortable quiet of her partner resting, but the hollow absence of something missing. Panic spiked through her chest. She twisted her head to the side, searching for any trace of navy and red fabric. The slab next to hers held only corroded medical instruments and a drain caked with brownish residue. The restraint on her right wrist snapped. Not from her pulling, but from sheer fury channeling into her arm with enough force to shear the bolt clean through. She sat up fast, ignoring the way her vision swam, and tore through the remaining straps like they were paper. The room resolved around her as her eyes adjusted. She was in some kind of morgue or medical bay walls lined with examination slabs and steel cabinets marked with symbols she didn't recognize. The floor was grated metal. Dark liquid pooled in the channels beneath, blood old and dried to the color of rust. But not just blood. Something else mixed in viscous and oily that caught the light wrong. Ryuko swung her legs off the slab and stood. Her knees buckled immediately. She caught herself on the edge of the table, breathing hard, and waited for the weakness to pass. It didn't. Every muscle in her body screamed protest, like she'd been running for days without rest. A door hissed open across the room. Red light spilled through, silhouetting a figure in robes the color of dried blood. The figure moved with mechanical precision, servos clicking with each step, and when it turned its head, the movement was too smooth, too fluid for flesh alone. "Subject Primus demonstrates unexpected motor function recovery," the figure said. Its voice emerged from a Vox grill instead of a mouth flat and buzzing with electronic distortion. Restraint failure at 0712. Consciousness achieved 14 hours ahead of projected threshold. Ryuko straightened despite the exhaustion weighing her down. "Where's Senketsu?" The robed figure tilted its head, optical lenses whirring as they focused on her face. "Subject demonstrates linguistic capability. Query identifies emotional attachment to unknown entity designated Senketsu. Cross-reference with recovered materials." "I asked you a question," Ryuko said, taking a step forward. Her legs held this time barely. "Where is my partner?" The figure's robes shifted, revealing mechanical appendages that unfolded from beneath the fabric like a spider's legs. Each one ended in a different tool saw, drill injector, things Ryuko didn't have names for, but are recognized as instruments meant to cut and analyze. Subject displays aggression response. Hostility parameters exceed predicted behavioral models. Recommendation sedation and secondary restraint protocols. One of the mechanical arms swung toward her, the injector at its tip gleaming with something that looked like liquid mercury. Ryuko caught it mid-swing, her hand closing around the cold metal with a grip that made the servos whine. She twisted hard and felt something crucial snap inside the mechanism. "Try that again, and I'll rip your whole arm off," she said, voice gone quiet and sharp. "Last chance. Tell me where my stuff is." The figure stepped back, remaining appendages retracting into defensive positions. "Security alert. Subject Primus exhibits hostile behavior toward authorized personnel, requesting Skitarii intervention." Alarms began shrieking through the facility, harsh and mechanical. Ryuko looked around for anything she could use as a weapon and spotted her red glove lying on a nearby instrument tray. She grabbed it and pulled it on, feeling fractionally more like herself with at least one piece of her gear back. The door burst open. 3 figures entered in formation, their movements synchronized with military precision. These wore armor that mixed organic curves with angular plating faces, hidden behind masks that glowed with targeting optics. Each carried a rifle that hummed with barely restrained energy. "Halt!" The lead figure commanded voice filtered through a respirator. "Submit to restraint or face termination." Ryuko flexed her gloved hand and felt the familiar weight of her scissor blade. Except the blade wasn't there. She still had one glove, but no weapon to wield. The absence felt like a missing tooth, a gap where something essential should be. "Look," she said, keeping her voice level despite the rage building in her chest. "I don't know where I am or what you people want, but I'm leaving. You can either tell me where my partner and my blade are, or I can tear this place apart until I find them myself." The lead soldier's targeting optics brightened. Threat assessment read, "Authorization for lethal force granted." The 3 rifles came up in unison. Ryuko's body moved before conscious thought caught up muscle memory from countless fights, carrying her sideways as last beam scorched the air where she'd been standing. She hit the ground rolling, came up near a steel cabinet, and ripped the door off its hinges with her bare hands. The metal door made a decent shield. Last beams splashed across its surface, leaving scorch marks, but not penetrating. Ryuko charged forward behind the improvised barrier, closing distance faster than the soldiers could adjust their aim. She slammed into the lead figure with the full weight of the cabinet, sending him crashing into his companions. They went down in a tangle of limbs and rifle straps. Ryuko dropped the mangled cabinet and grabbed one of the fallen weapons. The thing was heavy, awkward in her hands, covered in symbols and switches she didn't understand. She pointed it at the struggling soldiers and squeezed what looked like a trigger. Nothing happened. Some kind of bio-lock maybe, or a safety she couldn't see. She threw the useless rifle aside and instead kicked the nearest soldier hard enough to dent his chest plate. The impact sent him sliding across the grated floor to slam into the far wall. The other 2 recovered faster than she expected, training overriding pain as they drew combat knives from belt sheaths. The blades crackled with the same energy that powered their rifles, edges glowing blue-white with heat that distorted the air. Ryuko met them without a weapon, without her scissor blade or Senketsu's transformation, with nothing but her fists and the stubborn refusal to go down quietly. The first knife came at her throat. She caught the soldier's wrist, twisted it until bones ground together, and drove her knee into his gut, hard enough to lift him off his feet. The second soldier tried to flank her. She spun and caught his blade hand too, then slammed their heads together with a hollow clang of metal on metal. Both soldiers dropped. Ryuko stood over them, breathing hard, her vision starting to blur at the edges. The exhaustion was catching up her body, demanding rest she couldn't afford to give. She stumbled toward the door they'd come through, using the wall for support. The corridor beyond stretched in both directions, identical passages of gray metal and flickering lights. No signs, no markers, nothing to indicate which way led out or where they might be keeping her things. She picked a direction at random and started walking, each step a struggle against the weakness dragging at her limbs. Doors lined the corridor, most sealed with pressure locks that hissed when she passed. Through observation windows, she caught glimpses of more medical bays. Examination rooms, storage chambers filled with equipment she couldn't identify. No people, no senketsu, no sign of anything familiar. She'd made it maybe 50 meters when her legs finally gave out. Ryuko caught herself on the wall, slid down to sit on the cold floor, and tried to force her body back into motion. It refused. The exhaustion had gone beyond physical, into something deeper. A draining that felt like someone had pulled her apart and put her back together. Missing pieces. "Senketsu," she said again, quieter this time. "I could really use you right now." Still nothing. Just the hum of machinery and the distant sound of alarms that hadn't stopped screaming since she'd broken free. Ryuko closed her eyes and focused on breathing, on building enough strength to stand and keep searching. She'd torn apart bigger facilities than this looking for answers. She'd fought through worse odds with less. This was just another obstacle. Another system trying to box her in, another authority demanding compliance. She'd broken through every one before. This would be no different. She just needed her partner back first. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, multiple sets moving in formation. Heavier than the soldiers, accompanied by the whir of more complex machinery. Ryuko forced her eyes open and saw figures approaching from both directions, cutting off any escape. These wore different armor, bulkier and more ornate, marked with symbols that seemed to crawl across the metal surface. The leader stopped a few meters away and regarded her with eyes that glowed behind lenses set into a skull-faced helm. When the figure spoke, the voice carried weight beyond its mechanical filtering, an authority that expected instant obedience. "You have caused significant disruption to this facility's operations," the figure said. "3 Skitarii incapacitated. 1 Tech Priest's Augmentix damaged beyond field repair. Property destruction totaling 17,000 throne geld." Ryuko met that glowing gaze without flinching. "Send me a bill." "Your humor is noted and dismissed," the figure continued. "I am Inquisitor Severine Cult of the Ordo Hereticus. You are hereby detained under suspicion of Xenos contamination, tech heresy, and possible demonic possession. You will submit to interrogation or you will be terminated. These are your only options." Ryuko pushed herself upright, using the wall, ignoring the way her vision swam. "Option 3, she said. "I walk out of here with my stuff and nobody else gets hurt." Inquisitor Cult made a small gesture. The soldiers around her raised weapons that looked significantly more threatening than the rifles she'd faced before. These were larger, heavier, with barrels that crackled with ominous energy. "There is no option 3, the Inquisitor said. "Not in this Imperium. Not anywhere within the God Emperor's domain." Ryuko felt a smile pull at her lips, despite everything sharp and humorless. "Then I guess we're doing this the hard way." She pushed off the wall, fists raised, ready to go down, fighting if that's what it took. The soldiers tracked her movement, fingers tightening on triggers, waiting for the order to fire. Before anyone could move, before the order could be given a voice, cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "Wait!" Another figure emerged from the shadows behind the Inquisitor, this one draped in robes of deep crimson that seemed to absorb light. Mechanical limbs unfolded from beneath the fabric, and when the figure's hood fell back, it revealed a face that was more metal than flesh. With optical lenses, where eyes should be, and cables running into the scalp like artificial hair. "Magos Zenarit Halix 9. The figure introduced itself, voice crackling with vox distortion. I have interest in this specimen. Its biological structure demonstrates anomalous properties worthy of study. Inquisitor Cult turned slightly, her posture shifting to something defensive. This is Ordo Hereticus Jurisdiction Magos. The specimen presents clear signs of contamination. Contamination implies corruption. Halix 9 countered. I detect no warp taint, no demonic presence. What I detect is fascinating. The fiber structure integrated with its physiology is unlike any Xenos biology in Mechanicus archives. Ryuko's attention sharpened at that. They were talking about Senketsu. They had to be. Where is it? She demanded, interrupting the debate between Inquisitor and Magos. The fabric you're talking about. Where did you put it? Halix 9's lenses focused on her with mechanical precision. The anomalous material was separated from your person upon arrival and placed in containment. It demonstrated unusual properties. Movement without external stimulus. Apparent sentience. Most intriguing. Relief flooded through Ryuko enough to push back the exhaustion for a moment. Senketsu was here, still intact, still close enough to find. Take me to it, she said. Now. The Inquisitor's hand moved to the weapon at her hip, a massive pistol that looked capable of punching through tank armor. The specimen makes demands. How typically arrogant. Not a demand. Ryuko corrected her voice, dropping to something cold and flat. Fair warning. I'm getting my partner back. You can help or get out of the way. But you're not stopping me. For a long moment, nobody moved. The corridor filled with tension, thick enough to choke on weapons trained and ready. Ryuko's fists still raised, despite the exhaustion threatening to drag her down. Then, Magos Halix 9 made a sound like machine laughter, artificial and jarring. Fascinating, the Magos said. The specimen demonstrates loyalty to a non-organic entity. Bond formation with artificial construct. Most irregular, most worthy of further study. The Inquisitor's grip on her pistol tightened. I will not permit. You will permit. Halix 9 interrupted, mechanical limbs unfolding to their full span. Because I invoke Mechanicus authority over technological artifacts of unknown origin. The anomalous material falls under my jurisdiction. What I choose to do with it and its associated biological component is my decision to make. The air between Inquisitor and Magos crackled with institutional tension, two branches of the same vast machine suddenly finding their gears grinding against each other. Ryuko watched both, calculating distances, looking for openings, if this turned into a fight she could exploit. Finally, Inquisitor Cult spoke, her voice gone dangerously quiet. You tread on dangerous ground, Magos. The Ordo Hereticus does not relinquish jurisdiction lightly. Nor does the Adeptus Mechanicus yield its sacred duty to recover and analyze Xenorite technology, Halix 9 replied. We have reached an impasse that requires arbitration at higher authority levels. Until such time, I propose a compromise. What compromise? The Magos turned its attention back to Ryuko, lenses clicking as they refocused. The specimen desires its anomalous material. I desire to study both specimen and material under controlled conditions. The Inquisitor desires assurance that no contamination threatens Imperial security. All objectives can be satisfied through cooperative detention and observation. Ryuko didn't like the sound of that at all. I'm not some lab rat for you to dissect. The alternative, Inquisitor Cult said, her tone making it clear this was a final offer, is summary execution. Choose quickly. My patience expires. Ryuko looked from the Inquisitor's cold certainty to the Magos' clinical fascination to the soldiers surrounding her, with weapons that could reduce her to ash. She thought about Senketsu alone in containment somewhere in this facility, waiting for her to come back. She thought about how far she'd come, how many systems she'd torn through looking for answers, looking for truth. Getting shot here accomplished nothing. "Fine," she said. "But I want to see my partner. Prove you've actually got him, and haven't just incinerated him, or whatever you people do with things you don't understand." Halleck's Nine's limbs retracted slightly, a gesture that might have been agreement. "Acceptable terms. Follow." The Magos turned and began moving down the corridor, mechanical limbs clicking against the grated floor. Inquisitor Colt gestured curtly, and the soldiers fell into formation around Ryuko, weapons still trained, but no longer quite so eager to fire. Ryuko walked between them, every step an act of will over exhaustion, and tried not to think about how badly this could go wrong. She'd made deals with people who wanted to use her before. Most of them had regretted it. These people would too, if they tried anything permanent with Senketsu. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, this one dominated by containment pods set into the walls like massive glass coffins. Most held equipment or substances she couldn't identify. But one pod, isolated from the others behind triple-layer shielding, held something that made her heart clench with recognition. Navy and red fabric folded carefully, pulsing with faint light that had nothing to do with the chamber's illumination. Senketsu. Alive. Contained, but not destroyed. Ryuko moved forward without thinking, soldiers shouting behind her, weapons training on her back. She pressed her hands against the outer shield and felt warmth radiating through the barrier. "Senketsu," she said. "I'm here. We're getting out of this." The fabric rippled in response, that familiar consciousness, reaching out across the distance, and for the first time since waking in this nightmare, Ryuko felt something close to hope. The containment chamber hummed with power that made Ryuko's teeth ache. She stood before the triple-layered barrier, keeping Senketsu isolated. One hand pressed against the outer shield, feeling warmth pulse through the energy field like a heartbeat. The fabric inside shifted, rippling with that familiar consciousness reaching toward her across the distance. Behind her, Magos Halleck's Nine's mechadendrites clicked in word as the tech priest examined readouts from equipment clustered around the pod. Inquisitor Colt watched both Ryuko and the contained fabric with the patient stillness of a predator deciding which prey to strike first. The Skitarii formed a perimeter, weapons trained on Ryuko's back, their respirators creating a rhythm of mechanical breathing that filled the chamber. Remarkable biometric synchronization. Halleck's Nines had optical lenses focusing on the data streams cascading across display screens. Subject's heart rate decreased by 17% upon visual contact with anomalous material. Stress hormone markers dropping. The bond demonstrates physiological interdependence. Ryuko didn't look away from Senketsu. "He's not material. He's my partner." "It," Colt corrected, her voice cutting like a blade through cold air. "Biological contamination requires proper classification. Sentiment clouds, judgment." "Call him whatever you want," Ryuko said. "Doesn't change what he is to me." She turned to face them, putting her back to the containment pod. The movement drew immediate response from the Skitarii rifles tracking her motion with mechanical precision. Ryuko ignored them and focused on the Inquisitor's skull-faced helm. "So what now?" she asked. "You interrogate me, dissect us both, kill me and burn him, because you don't understand what you're looking at." Colt stepped forward, her armored boots striking the floor with measured authority. "Understanding is secondary to containment. The Imperium has survived 10,000 years by recognizing threats and eliminating them before they spread. You and your contamination represent unknown variables. Unknowns are heresy by definition. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, Ryuko said flatly. You can't just kill everything you don't understand. The survival of humanity suggests otherwise, Cult replied. Billions of worlds, quadrillions of souls, all protected by our vigilance against corruption in every form. She paused, helm tilting slightly. Tell me what you are. Where you came from. How you came to bond with Xenos material. Ryuko met that eyeless gaze without flinching. I'm human, from Earth. And Senketsu isn't Xenos, he's life fibers. We've been partners since I was 17. Earth classification requires elaboration. Helix 9 interjected mechadendrites extending to gesture at star charts projected onto the chamber's walls. No world designated Earth exists within current Imperial cartography. Terra is humanity's birth world, but subject demonstrates no low gothic fluency markers. Linguistic patterns suggest alternative development trajectory. I don't know what Terra is, Ryuko admitted. I know Earth, Tokyo, Hanuji Academy, places that probably don't exist wherever the hell this is. Cult's hand moved to rest on the massive bolt pistol at her hip. Alternative reality hypothesis suggests warp contamination. Entities claiming origin from impossible places are typically demonic in nature. I'm not a demon, Ryuko said, her patience fraying. I'm just trying to get home. Prove it, Cult demanded. Submit to psychic examination. Allow our sanctioned psychers to probe your mind for taint. Ryuko's jaw tightened. She'd been poked and prodded enough for one day. How about no? The Inquisitor's fingers tightened on her weapon. Then you confirm our suspicions through refusal. I confirm that I'm not letting strangers root around in my head, Ryuko shot back. Where I come from, people who tried that usually regretted it. Helix 9 made a sound like grinding gears, possibly frustration. Stalemate serves no productive purpose. Proposal-controlled observation in place of invasive examination. Subject remains contained. Anomalous material remains secured. Both undergo non-invasive analysis to determine origin composition threat assessment. How long? Ryuko asked. Indefinite duration, the Magos replied. Comprehensive xenotech analysis requires thorough methodology. So forever, Ryuko translated. Yeah, that's not happening either. Cult drew her bolt pistol in one smooth motion, the weapon's machine spirit growling with barely contained violence. Your cooperation is not required for termination. Ryuko shifted her weight, ready to move, despite knowing she was too drained to win a straight fight against this many opponents. The Skitarii adjusted their aim. Mechadendrites unfolded into defensive configurations, the chamber filled with tension thick enough to choke on. Before anyone could fire, Senketsu pulsed with brilliant crimson light that blazed through the containment shields. The barrier's flickered energy patterns disrupting as the fabric inside pressed against its prison with sudden force. Alarms shrieked across the facility. Helix 9's equipment sparked and died, data streams corrupting into static. Containment breach imminent. The Magos reported mechadendrites working frantically to restore power. Subject exhibits active resistance to standard suppression fields. Recommend immediate purge protocol. Wait, Ryuko said, stepping toward the pod. He's just scared. Scared for me. If you kill me, he'll tear this whole place apart trying to get out. Cult kept her pistol trained on Ryuko's center mass. Threats will not improve your situation. Not a threat, Ryuko corrected. Fair warning. Senketsu and I are connected. Hurt one of us, the other gets pissed off. You've seen what I can do, even half dead. Imagine what he's capable of when he's actually trying. The fabric pulsed again, brighter this time. Small cracks appeared in the inner shield layer, hairline fractures spreading like frost across glass. The temperature in the chamber dropped 10 degrees in as many seconds. Hallex 9's optical lenses cycled through multiple spectrums. Energy signature escalating beyond predicted parameters. Material demonstrates reactive intelligence. Threat assessment requires recalibration. Stand down, Kalt commanded, though it wasn't clear if she was speaking to Ryuko the Skitari or Senketsu himself. All parties. Immediate cessation of hostile action. Ryuko raised her hands, slowly palms out. Senketsu. It's okay. I'm okay. Just calm down. The pulsing light dimmed fractionally. The cracks stopped spreading. But the warmth radiating from the pod intensified, and Ryuko could feel her partner's fear bleeding through the connection they shared. Fear for her. Rage at being separated. Determination to break free and protect her, regardless of cost. See, Ryuko said quietly. He's not Xenos. Not demon. He's family. Kalt holstered her pistol with deliberate slowness. Family or not, the anomaly presents clear danger to Imperial assets and personnel. It cannot be released into general population. Then don't release it into general population, Ryuko said. Keep us together. Keep us contained if you have to, but don't separate us. That's when things get dangerous. The Inquisitor and Magos exchanged a long look. Institutional gears grinding as Ordo Hereticus and Adeptus Mechanicus calculated risk versus reward. Finally, Hallex 9 spoke. Proposal revision joint custody under dual observation protocols. Subject and anomalous material remain together in controlled environment. Both undergo continuous monitoring. Data collection proceeds without invasive procedures. Duration extends until threat assessment achieves satisfactory resolution or termination becomes necessary. Joint custody. Kalt repeated her tone, suggesting she'd swallowed something bitter. You propose we collaborate on this contamination. I propose we leverage institutional strengths. Hallex 9 corrected. Your expertise in corruption detection. My expertise in xenotech analysis. Combined resources produce superior outcomes. Kalt was silent for a long moment, her helm's lenses fixed on Ryuko. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority, making a concession it despised. Acceptable. With conditions. Always conditions with you people, Ryuko muttered. The Inquisitor ignored her. The specimen will be fitted with tracking devices and suppression collar. Any attempt at escape triggers immediate termination protocols. Any sign of warp, taint, or corruption results in summary execution and incineration of all contaminated materials. The anomalous material will be secured in portable containment during transport and study. Violations of any parameter result in purge protocols with extreme prejudice. Ryuko looked at the containment pod at Senketsu, still pulsing with anxious energy, and weighed her options. She could fight. Probably die fighting. Definitely fail to protect her partner in the process. Or she could play along. Let these people think they had control and wait for the right moment to break free. Fine, she said. But I want to talk to him first. Explain what's happening. He needs to hear it from me or he'll keep trying to break out. Hallex 9's mechadendrites twitched. Communication with anomalous material poses risks. So does keeping us separated, Ryuko countered. Your choice. Let me calm him down, or deal with whatever happens when he gets mad enough to punch through your shields. Another exchange of looks between Inquisitor and Magos, more institutional calculation. Finally, Kalt gestured curtly. 5 minutes, under supervision. First sign of coordinated escape attempt, we purge both of you. Helix 9's mechadendrites worked at a control panel. The inner shield dropped with a hum of dissipating energy. The middle shield flickered, but held. Close enough for communication, not close enough for reunion. Ryuko moved to the barrier and pressed both hands against it. Senketsu pressed back from the inside fabric, shaping itself into something almost like palms, meeting hers through the energy field. "Hey," she said softly. "I'm okay. Banged up, but okay." The fabric rippled, that familiar consciousness flooding through their connection with relief and fury in equal measure. Ryuko felt his questions, his concern, his desperate need to know she was safe. "I know," she continued. "This whole thing is screwed up. But we need to play along for now. Let them think they've got us locked down. We'll figure out how to get home. But we need time, and we need to be smart about it." Senketsu pulsed once sharp and questioning. Ryuko smiled despite everything. "Yeah, I know smart isn't usually my style. But you're always telling me to think before I punch things. So I'm thinking." She paused, glancing back at Colt and Helix 9, watching from their positions. "These people are scared. They don't understand us, and fear makes them dangerous. We give them what they want, cooperation, observation, whatever, while we figure out where we are and how to get back to our universe." The fabric settled slightly, warmth steady through the barrier. Acceptance reluctant, but present. "That's my partner," Ryuko said. "We've gotten through worse than this. Remember, Ragyo, this is nothing compared to her." Senketsu pulsed with something that felt like agreement mixed with caution. Ryuko nodded. "Exactly. Stay calm. Stay safe. We'll fix this together just like always." She pulled her hands back from the barrier. Immediately, the fabric's agitation spiked, reaching for her, even as the distance between them grew. Ryuko forced herself to step away, to turn her back on her partner, and face the people holding them both prisoner. "He's calm," she said. "Now what?" Colt gestured to the Scutarii. Two soldiers advanced, one carrying a metal collar studded with mechanisms. Ryuko didn't recognize the other, holding what looked like an oversized syringe filled with luminous fluid. "Suppression collar first," the Inquisitor said. "Then tracking implants. Then transport to holding facility on Pallidum." "What's Pallidum?" Ryuko asked, even as she calculated whether she could disable both soldiers before the others shot her. "Hive world, under combined Adeptus Mechanicus and Ordo Hereticus jurisdiction," Helix 9 supplied. "Population 17 billion. Primary industries, manufactorum, output, weapons production, chemical synthesis. Relevant detail, significant underhive infrastructure provides ideal isolated testing environment." The soldier with the collar moved behind Ryuko. She felt cold metal settle against her throat, heard mechanisms engage with a series of clicks that seemed far too final. "This feels a lot like a slave collar," she said, keeping her voice level. "Classification restraint device," Colt corrected. "Designed to suppress anomalous abilities through localized electromagnetic disruption. Attempts to remove it result in neural shock followed by cardiac arrest." "So, a kill switch," Ryuko translated. "Awesome." The second soldier moved in with the syringe. Ryuko tensed but held still as the injector pressed against her neck and fired with a pneumatic hiss. Something cold and sharp embedded itself beneath her skin, burrowing toward her carotid artery with mechanical precision. "Tracking beacon," Helix 9 explained. "Bio-integrated. Removal equals death. Location data transmitted continuously to Mechanicus and Inquisitorial monitoring stations." Ryuko's hand went to her neck, feeling the small lump where the device had settled. "You people really don't trust anyone, do you? Trust is heresy, Kalt said simply. In the Imperium, only the God Emperor is worthy of faith. All else requires verification and control. Sounds like a great way to live, Ryuko muttered. The Skitarii backed away, weapons still trained but no longer quite so aggressive in their readiness. Hallex 9 worked at the containment controls again. The pod containing Senketsu began to hum, its shape distorting, as mechanisms shifted it into transport configuration. The fabric inside pressed against its prison with obvious distress. "Easy," Ryuko called out. "Just a ride. We're going together. Remember?" Senketsu settled fractionally, but the warmth radiating from him carried clear warning. One wrong move and all cooperation ended. "Transport shuttle awaits," Hallex 9 announced. "Estimated journey to Paladum, 47 hours via warp translation. Subject will be secured in isolation chamber for duration." 47 hours in a box, Ryuko said. "Can't wait." Kalt moved to stand directly in front of her, close enough that Ryuko could see her own reflection in the Inquisitor's helm lenses. "Understand this contamination," Kalt said, her voice gone soft and deadly. "You exist because we permit it. You breathe because we have not yet decided to stop that breath. Your cooperation purchases temporary survival, nothing more. The moment you cease to be useful, you become ash and memory." Ryuko held that eyeless gaze and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear. Something harder. The same determination that had carried her through Hanuji, through Revox, through every system that had tried to break her. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Well, here's something for you to understand. I've broken free from people who thought they owned me before. Doesn't matter how powerful they were, how many guns they had, how sure they were that I'd stay controlled." She smiled, sharp and humorless. "I'm still here. They're not. Think about that while you're planning what to do with me." For a moment, absolute silence filled the chamber. Then Kalt turned away, dismissing Ryuko like something beneath notice. "Prepare the subject for transport," she ordered the Skitarii. "Mago secure the anomalous material. We depart for Paladum within the hour." The soldiers closed in around Ryuko, weapons ready, and began herding her toward the chamber's exit. She walked between them and tried not to think about the collar around her throat, or the tracker in her neck, or the 47 hours in isolation ahead. Instead, she focused on the warmth still bleeding through from Senketsu, on the connection that no amount of metal or energy shields could truly sever. They'd been separated before. They'd always found their way back together. This time would be no different. The corridor outside the containment chamber stretched toward hangar bays she couldn't yet see, and Ryuko walked toward an unknown destination with guards at her back and her partner locked in a box behind her. But she was still standing, still fighting, still refusing to break, no matter how many chains these people wrapped around her. That was enough. For now, it had to be enough. Paladum swallowed the shuttle whole. Ryuko watched through the viewport as they descended past kilometer-high spires that clawed at a sky the color of old bruises, past manufactorum complexes that sprawled across entire city districts, past habitation blocks stacked so high the upper levels disappeared into smog-choked clouds. The planet was one massive hive of humanity packed into artificial mountains of metal and stone, billions of souls crushed together until individuality became a luxury only the wealthy could afford. Vespera Hive rose from the planetary crust like a rusted blade, its silhouette jagged with communication towers and defense platforms. The shuttle banked hard, dropping toward a landing platform halfway up the hive's flank. Ryuko felt the deck shift beneath her feet as retro thrusters fired, arresting their descent with mechanical precision. She sat in restraints designed for someone twice her size, the suppression collar cold against her throat, and tried to ignore the way her whole body ached from 47 hours of warp transit. The journey had been worse than any nightmare she'd experienced. Reality itself seemed to twist during those hours, time stretching and compressing until she couldn't tell if minutes or days were passing. Voices whispered at the edge of hearing, speaking languages that hurt to almost comprehend. And through it all, the faint warmth of Senketsu's presence, locked in his containment pod somewhere else in the shuttle, was the only thing that kept her sane. The shuttle shuddered to a halt. Hydraulics hissed as the boarding ramp lowered, letting in air that tasted like burning promethium mixed with human sweat and industrial waste. Skitarii Alpha Vorn entered the holding compartment, his respirator creating steady mechanical rhythm as he regarded her with glowing optical sensors. "Disembark," he commanded, his voice filtered through layers of augmetic enhancement. "Remain within designated perimeter or face immediate correction." Ryuko stood stretching muscles that screamed protest and walked down the ramp into Paladum's toxic atmosphere. The landing platform was all gunmetal gray and rust-red stains marked with symbols she was starting to recognize as warnings and prayers to their machine god. Workers in environment suits hurried about their tasks, avoiding eye contact with the Skitarii escort surrounding her. Inquisitor Cult waited at the platform's edge, her armored form silhouetted against the hive's sprawl. Beyond her, Ryuko could see the city stretching in all directions, a maze of towers and bridges and arterial transit lines that never seemed to end. "Welcome to Vespera, Hive." Cult set her tone, suggesting the welcome was anything but warm. Population 8 billion. Primary output weapons manufacturing, chemical synthesis. Industrial-grade servitor production. Relevant to your situation. Extensive underhive infrastructure currently experiencing significant heretical activity. "And that's where you're sending me," Ryuko guessed. "Observation through action provides superior data to static examination," Magos Helix 9 said, emerging from the shuttle with Senketsu's containment pod floating behind on anti-grav suspensors. "Subject will investigate suspected cult activity in lower levels. Anomalous material will accompany under controlled release parameters." Ryuko's attention fixed on the pod. "You're letting him out. Partial integration," Halix 9 clarified. "Sufficient for basic synchronization, insufficient for full transformation. Subject remains contained through suppression protocols." Cult gestured toward a lifter platform at the landing pad's far end. "You will descend to sublevel 973. Intelligence reports indicate cult presence in abandoned manufactorum districts. Your task: locate cult operations, identify leadership report findings via neural link." Neural link. Ryuko touched the lump in her neck where they'd implanted the tracking beacon. "Upgraded during transit," Halix 9 explained. "Tracker now includes Vox capability and biometric monitoring. We observe everything you experience." "So I'm bait," Ryuko said flatly. "Walk into whatever hellhole you found, see what bites, hope I survive long enough to tell you about it." "Bait implies value only as sacrifice," Cult corrected. "You are a tool. Tools that break are replaced. Tools that function are maintained. Demonstrate functionality and earn continued existence." Ryuko met the Inquisitor's eyeless gaze and felt that familiar anger building in her chest. But she forced it down, buried it under the same control that had gotten her through the transit. Losing her temper now accomplished nothing. "Fine," she said. "But I want Senketsu with me, all the way. No half measures." Cult was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded to Halix 9. The Magos worked at controls built into the containment pod. Energy barriers flickered and died. The pod split open like a metal flower, revealing navy and red fabric folded carefully inside. Senketsu burst from the containment in a wave of crimson light, flying across the distance between Pod and Ryuko, faster than the Skitarii could react. He wrapped around her shoulders, familiar warmth flooding through their connection with relief so intense it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Hey, partner," she whispered. "Miss me?" The fabric pulsed against her skin, emotions bleeding through too complex for words. Relief, anger, fear, determination. All of it wrapped together in the bond they shared. Synchronization achieved. Halix 9 observed sensors trained on them both. Biometric integration proceeding within acceptable parameters. Fascinating. Ryuko felt Senketsu settling into place, not full transformation, but enough that she could feel his presence properly again. The exhaustion that had weighed her down since waking lessened fractionally. Not gone, but manageable. Suppression protocols remain active, Kalt warned. Attempt transformation beyond permitted parameters and the collar activates. Cardiac arrest follows within seconds. Understood. Understood. Ryuko confirmed, running her hand over Senketsu's fabric. Now what? Vorn stepped forward, a Skitarii rifle extended toward her. You will require armament. Standard pattern galvanic rifle. Magazine capacity 40 rounds. Effective range 300 meters. Firing mechanism biometrically locked to authorized users. Ryuko took the weapon, testing its weight. Heavy, awkward, nothing like her scissor blade. I'm authorized temporarily, Vorn replied. Biolock keyed to your implant signature. Weapon becomes inert if you exceed operational perimeter or fail to report scheduled updates. More leashes, Ryuko muttered, but she slung the rifle over her shoulder. Having any weapon was better than none. The lifter platform descended into Vespera Hive's depths with mechanical groaning that echoed through shaft walls marked with centuries of grime and graffiti. Ryuko stood alone on the platform, watching levels blur past as she dropped deeper into the city's bowels. Vorn had accompanied her the first 100 levels before stepping off at what he called the demarcation line between order and chaos. Everything below level 500 belonged to gangs, cults, and things that should have died but refused to accept that reality. The air grew thicker as she descended, pressure increasing until her ears popped. The temperature climbed too, heat rising from the manufactorums and plasma reactors that powered the upper hive. By the time she reached level 973, sweat soaked through her torn uniform and Senketsu's fabric felt uncomfortably warm against her skin. The platform shuddered to a halt. Ryuko stepped off into darkness, cut by flickering lumens that cast everything in shades of amber and shadow. The corridor ahead stretched into industrial gloom walls, marked with symbols she didn't recognize but understood instinctively as territorial markers. Gang signs, warnings, promises of violence to anyone who trespassed. Neural link active? Kalt's voice crackled in her skull, the sensation of words directly in her brain, nearly making her stumble. Report status. Arrived at target level, Ryuko said, trying not to think too hard about how they were listening to her thoughts. Seeing gang markings, lots of them. Expected, Kalt replied. Cult activity typically establishes itself beneath gang territory. Use caution. The connection cut out. Ryuko stood in the corridor and let her eyes adjust to the poor lighting. The walls here showed signs of habitation alcoves carved into rockcrete where people had set up living spaces with scavenged materials. Most were empty now, occupants fled or dead, or hiding from whatever had moved into the area recently. What do you think? She asked Senketsu quietly. The fabric shifted against her shoulders, consciousness reaching out through their bond to sense the environment. Fear and wrongness bled through the connection. Something here made even Senketsu's alien nature recoil. "Yeah," Ryuko agreed. "I feel it too. Let's move." She advanced down the corridor, rifle held ready despite not knowing how to actually use the thing beyond pointing and pulling the trigger. The gang markings grew more elaborate as she progressed, territorial claims overlapping each other in layers that suggested decades of conflict. But newer marks cut across the old ones. Crude symbols that looked like they'd been painted in something dark and organic. Blood, probably. Nothing down here stayed clean for long. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, some kind of junction where multiple passages converged. Ryuko paused at the entrance, scanning for threats. Bodies lay scattered across the floor, at least 20 of them, all wearing the scavenged armor and gang colors of different factions. They hadn't killed each other. Something else had done this. Something that left wounds she recognized too well. Claw marks, deep gouges in flesh that went down to bone, and a smell that made her stomach turn rot, and corruption mixed with something chemical that burned her sinuses. "Multiple deceased," she reported, knowing Colt was listening. "Looks like gang members. Killed by something with claws." "Document and proceed," Colt's voice commanded. "Locate source." Ryuko moved through the carnage carefully, trying not to think about the fact that these bodies were recent. Hours old, at most. Whatever killed them could still be close. A sound echoed from one of the adjoining passages. Footsteps, multiple sets moving with coordinated purpose. Ryuko ducked behind a support column and brought the rifle up, finger near the trigger. 6 figures emerged from the passage, all wearing robes the color of old bone. Their faces were hidden behind masks that looked like they'd been crafted from actual skulls' eye sockets filled with dark glass that reflected no light. They moved in formation, scanning the chamber with obvious practice, and when one of them spoke, the voice carried disturbing harmony, like multiple people speaking in perfect unison. "The offering has been claimed," the figure said. "The thread hungers. More will be gathered." Another robed figure replied in the same disturbing harmony. "The cantor demands purity." These vessels were insufficient. Flawed meat, unworthy thread. They were talking about the bodies. The gang members had been sacrifices, offerings to whatever sick god these cultists worshipped. And they'd been rejected, found wanting, killed, and left to rot because they didn't meet some twisted standard. Ryuko felt Senketsu tense against her, his presence radiating warning. These people were dangerous. Not just armed, but believers. The kind of fanatics who die smiling if they thought it pleased their masters. She could fall back, report what she'd found, let Colt and Hallex 9 decide how to proceed. That was the smart play, the careful play. But Ryuko had never been good at careful. She stepped out from behind the column rifle, aimed at the nearest cultist. "Hey," she said, "you and your friends want to explain what the hell you're doing down here." The cultists turned as one, their movements synchronized in a way that made her skin crawl. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the lead cultist tilted its head, studying her with those dark glass eyes. "Outsider," it said in that horrible harmonic voice. "Unmarked, unsanctioned. You wear thread, but know not its truth." "I know enough," Ryuko replied, keeping the rifle steady. "Know you're killing people. Know you're calling it offerings." "That stops now." The cultist laughed, and the sound echoed wrong in the chamber, multiplying until it seemed like dozens laughed instead of one. "The thread decides who lives and who becomes offering," it said. "You understand nothing, child. Your fabric is crude, unrefined. But it carries potential. The cultist raised one hand, and Ryuko saw the palm was marked with a symbol that seemed to twist and shift even as she looked at it. "Come. The cantor will judge your worthiness." "Not happening," Ryuko said, and pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked harder than she expected, nearly tearing itself from her grip. Energy discharged in a brilliant flash, the round catching the lead cultist in the chest and punching through robes and flesh with devastating effect. The figure staggered backward, smoke rising from the wound, and collapsed. The other cultists moved immediately, not fleeing, not taking cover, but charging directly toward her with blades that appeared in their hands like they'd been hidden in the robe's folds. Ryuko fired again, dropped a second cultist, then a third. But the others were too close now, spreading to flank her position. Senketsu surged across her body fabric, extending to deflect a blade that would have opened her throat. The knife scraped across transformed cloth and skittered away harmlessly. Ryuko drove the rifle butt into the cultist's masked face, felt bone crunch beneath the impact, and spun to meet the next attacker. This one was faster blade coming from an angle she barely saw in time. She twisted, felt the knife graze her ribs, and kicked out hard enough to send the cultist flying backward into a support column. The suppression collar activated without warning. Pain exploded through her nervous system, every muscle seizing simultaneously. Ryuko hit the ground hard, the rifle clattering from nerveless fingers. Senketsu tried to maintain his protective configuration, but the collar's energy disrupted their synchronization, forcing him back to his base form. Transformation parameters exceeded. Cult's voice crackled in her skull. Collar activation automatic. Return to baseline or face termination. Ryuko tried to speak to Curse to do anything except writhe on the floor while the remaining cultists advanced with their blades raised. Through blurring vision, she saw them converging, saw the knives coming down, and knew she was about to die because she'd pushed too hard against her electronic leash. Then the cultists simply stopped. Not attacked, not driven back, but frozen in place, like someone had hit pause on their existence. Ryuko's vision cleared enough to see why. A figure stood in the chamber entrance, tall and wrapped in robes the color of dried blood. But these weren't cultist robes. These were marked with symbols of authority she'd seen on Cult and the other Inquisition members. And the face beneath the hood was human, marked with scars and augmetic replacements, but undeniably alive and focused entirely on the frozen cultists. "By the authority of the Ordo Hereticus," the figure said, voice carrying absolute command, "you are declared excommunicate traitoress, sentenced death." The figure raised one hand. The cultists' heads simply exploded, bursting like overripe fruit. Their bodies collapsed in unison, and silence reclaimed the chamber. The collar's activation ceased. Ryuko gasped for air, her muscles screaming protest as feeling returned in waves of agony. Senketsu wrapped around her protectively, his warmth trying to soothe the pain. The robed figure approached, stopping a few meters away. Up close, Ryuko could see the augmetics were extensive. One eye had been replaced with a targeting lens that glowed faintly red. Cables ran from ports in the skull down beneath the robes. And on the chest, displayed prominently, hung a rosette marked with the Inquisition symbol. "Inquisitor Cade," the figure introduced, voice dry as ash. "Ordo Hereticus, you must be Severine's new acquisition." Ryuko pushed herself to sitting, breathing hard. "Lucky guess." "Not luck," Cade corrected. "I've been monitoring your descent. Cult requested I ensure you didn't expire prematurely." The Inquisitor gestured at the dead cultists. These were low-level initiates. barely worth the effort of execution. The true cult operates deeper in the underhive. Great. Ryuko managed, finally getting to her feet. Any other good news? Cade's scarred face might have smiled, though it was hard to tell. The Pale Thread cult has operated in Vesper's depths for approximately 17 months. Standard practice: they abduct hivers, perform unknown rituals, either convert or kill them. Bodies recovered show signs of systematic torture and tissue alteration. We've lost 3 investigation teams attempting to locate their central operations. And you're telling me this why? Because you survived the initial contact, Cade replied. That alone makes you valuable. Most subjects die within the first encounter. You fought back, adapted, demonstrated resilience. The Inquisitor paused. Cult wants you to locate their ritual site. I'm here to ensure you reach it alive. Ryuko retrieved her rifle, checking it for damage. What makes you think I'll find it when your teams couldn't? Cade pointed at Senketsu. That. The cultists called it crude thread. They recognize something familiar in your partner's composition, which means they have thread of their own, more refined, more controlled, more dangerous. The implications settled in Ryuko's gut like ice water. They've got something like Senketsu. A corruption of it, Cade confirmed. Life fibers, you called them. Fascinating technology. Disturbing applications. The Inquisitor turned toward the passage the cultists had emerged from. We go deeper. Stay close. Try not to exceed your caller's parameters again, unless you wish to die. Ryuko looked at Senketsu, felt his concern bleeding through their bond, and knew they had no real choice. Going deeper meant answers, and answers meant a chance at finding a way home. Lead the way, she said. Cade moved into the passage without hesitation. Ryuko followed, rifle ready, and tried not to think about the fact that she was descending into a cultist stronghold with a stranger, a bomb around her neck, and no backup except her partner. This was exactly the kind of situation she usually created through poor planning. For once, it wasn't her fault. That didn't make it any less dangerous. The passages descended in spirals that defied rational architecture walls, carved with symbols that seemed to writhe when glimpsed from the corner of her eye. Ryuko followed Inquisitor Cade through the darkness, their only light coming from the Inquisitor's augmetic eye and the faint bioluminescence of fungi growing in cracks between ancient stonework. The air grew thicker with each level they dropped, carrying smells that made her stomach clench. Incense mixed with rot. Perfume layered over decay, the scent of flowers blooming on corpses. Senketsu pressed tighter against her shoulders, his warmth carrying warning through their bond. Something ahead felt wrong. Not warp corruption like Cade had described, but familiar wrongness. The kind she'd encountered before when life fibers were being twisted into something they weren't meant to be. How much further? Ryuko asked, keeping her voice low. Cade didn't look back. We're close. You feel it too, don't you? The resonance between your fabric and whatever they're using? She did. A pulling sensation in her gut, like Senketsu was being drawn towards something that called to his fundamental nature. The feeling intensified with every step, building from background noise to active pain. The passage opened into a cathedral. That was the only word that fit the space spreading before them. The ceiling soared into darkness, too complete to penetrate, supported by columns carved to look like twisted human figures, locked in eternal agony. The floor was polished stone marked with concentric circles of symbols that pulsed with faint phosphorescence. And at the chamber's center stood a loom. Not like any loom Ryuko had seen. This thing was massive, constructed from metal and bone in equal measure, with threads running through its structure that glowed with sickly light. The threads weren't fabric. They were organic, pulsing with rhythms that matched a heartbeat. And when Ryuko looked at them directly, her vision swam with after-images of faces screaming silently. "Life fibers," she said, the recognition hitting like a punch to the chest. But wrong. Corrupted. Cade raised one hand, signaling halt. The ritual site. Exactly where our intelligence predicted. Figures moved between the columns, dozens of them, all wearing robes the color of bone and ash. They tended to the loom with reverent care, feeding new threads into its structure, adjusting tension, whispering prayers in languages that hurt to hear. At the loom's base sat a pool filled with liquid that reflected no light, its surface perfectly still despite the activity surrounding it. "They're weaving something," Ryuko said, "building it thread by thread." "A gateway," Cade corrected, "or a vessel." Intelligence couldn't determine which. "What we do know is that 17 months of abductions have fed this project. Every convert, every sacrifice, their essence extracted and woven into those threads." Ryuko felt bile rise in her throat. "They're making life fibers out of people." "Crude imitation," a new voice said from behind them. "But you grasp the principle." They spun, weapons raised. A figure stood in the passage they'd just descended, somehow having moved behind them without making a sound. The robes were different from the others, pristine white instead of bone gray. And the mask covering the face was crafted from porcelain, so fine it looked translucent. When the figure tilted its head, the movement was too smooth, too perfect, like a puppet guided by invisible strings. "The Pale Cantor," Cade said, his voice gone flat with recognition. The masked figure inclined its head in acknowledgement. "Inquisitor, your persistence is admirable. 3 teams before you failed to reach this chamber. You succeeded where they did not." The voice emerged from behind the mask with disturbing harmony, multiple tones layered into impossible accord. "Congratulations. Your reward is understanding before death." "We're not dying here," Ryuko said, bringing the rifle up. The Pale Cantor's attention shifted to her, and even through the mask, she felt the weight of its gaze. The girl who wears crude thread. The one who doesn't understand what she carries. The figure stepped forward, hands spread in gesture of welcome. "But you could understand. You could learn. We could teach you what your fabric truly represents." "Not interested," Ryuko replied, finger tightening on the trigger. "Patience," the Cantor said. "Before violence, allow me to show you truth." It gestured toward the loom. "What do you see?" Against her better judgment, Ryuko looked. The threads seemed clearer now, their structure more apparent. She could see how they wove together, how each strand contributed to a larger pattern that was almost but not quite complete. And in that pattern, she recognized something familiar. The weave structure matched Senketsu's composition. Same principles. Same fundamental architecture. But where Senketsu was alive, autonomous free, these threads were bound, controlled, forced into configurations that screamed against their nature. Abomination! Senketsu pulsed against her, his consciousness flooding through their bond with revulsion and rage. Perfection! The Pale Cantor corrected, somehow hearing or sensing Senketsu's response. Your fabric is wild, chaotic. It bonds with you through accident of compatibility but lacks true purpose. What we create here is deliberate, refined, every thread woven with intent, Every pattern serves the greater design. You're turning people into fabric, Ryuko said, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. You're killing them and wearing their corpses. We are elevating them, the cantor replied, granting them purpose beyond the meaningless suffering that defines existence in this Imperium. They become part of something greater, something beautiful, something that will reshape this rotting galaxy into a work of art. Kaid fired without warning, his bolt pistol roaring in the cathedral's confines. The round caught the pale cantor's center mass and detonated. The figure staggered backward, robes shredding to reveal what lay beneath. Not flesh, thread. Thousands of pale strands woven into approximate human shape, holding form through will and whatever dark power animated them. The damage repaired immediately, threads knitting back together until the wound vanished like it had never existed. Predictable. The cantor said, its harmonic voice unchanged despite the violence. The Imperium's response to anything it doesn't understand. Destroy it. Burn it. Purge it from existence. The figure's hands moved in complex patterns, and the robed cultists surrounding the loom turned as one to face the intruders. We offer evolution. You offer only death. Let us see which philosophy proves superior. The cultists advanced in perfect synchronization, their movements coordinated beyond any training or discipline. They moved like parts of a single organism, flowing around obstacles and covering each other's approaches with mechanical precision. Each one drew blades from within their robes, the weapons gleaming with the same sickly light as the loom's threads. Ryuko opened fire. The rifle kicked against her shoulder energy rounds, punching through the nearest attackers with devastating effect. But where she dropped one, two more appeared to fill the gap, and the ones she'd shot were already beginning to rise, wounds knitting closed with impossible speed. They're thread constructs, Cade shouted over the weapon's fire. Destroy the mask. That's where the intelligence resides. He charged forward, his own augmetic enhancements, granting him speed that blurred his form. The power sword at his hip ignited with blue fire as he drew it, the blessed blade cutting through thread flesh with more success than conventional weapons. Cultists fell before him, their bodies collapsing into loose threads when the sword's edge severed whatever held them together. Ryuko moved to follow, but Senketsu pulled at her consciousness with sudden urgency. She looked back toward the loom and saw what he'd sensed. The pattern was accelerating, threads weaving faster, the incomplete sections filling in with alarming speed. Whatever ritual this represented, it was reaching completion. The loom, she said. We have to stop it. Go, Cade replied, his sword taking another thread construct apart. I'll handle the cantor. Ryuko sprinted toward the loom rifle, firing to clear a path through the cultists, blocking her approach. The closer she got, the more Senketsu's distress bled through their bond. This thing wasn't just wrong. It was poison, a corruption of everything life fibers represented. And whatever it would become when finished, it needed to be destroyed before that completion. She reached the loom's base and raised the rifle, aiming at the central mechanisms. Before she could fire, the pale cantor appeared beside her, moving with speed no human body should possess. Its hand caught the rifle barrel and bent it effortlessly, twisting the weapon into useless scrap. Crude approach. The cantor set its porcelain mask inches from Ryuko's face. You would destroy what you don't comprehend. How very Imperium of you. Ryuko dropped the ruined rifle and swung a fist at the mask. The cantor caught her wrist mid-strike, threads extending from its palm to wrap around her arm like living restraints. But you're not Imperium, are you? The cantor continued, pulling her closer, despite her struggles. You're something else, something that doesn't belong in this diseased reality. We felt you the moment you arrived. Crude thread bonded to human consciousness. A partnership so pure it makes what we create here seem like shadow and lies. The threads tightened, cutting into her skin. Ryuko felt them trying to burrow deeper, seeking the connection between her and Senketsu. "We could offer you freedom," the cantor whispered. "Freedom from the collar around your throat. Freedom from the Imperium's chains. All you need to do is accept our truth. Let us show you what your fabric could become with proper refinement." Pain lanced through Ryuko's neck as the suppression device activated, responding to Senketsu's defensive surge. Her vision went white with agony, every nerve screaming, and she felt herself falling toward the pool of lightless liquid at the loom's base. The pale cantor caught her before she hit the surface threads wrapping around her torso to hold her suspended above the pool. "Look," the cantor commanded, forcing her head down toward the liquid. "See what we offer." The surface rippled. Images formed in its depths. Ryuko saw herself wearing Senketsu's full transformation, but changed, enhanced. The uniform structure more refined, its power amplified beyond anything she'd achieved before. She saw herself fighting without restriction, without the collar's threat, without the Imperium's control. Freedom, power, everything she'd lost when this nightmare began. "We can give you this," the cantor said. "All we ask is cooperation. Help us complete the pattern. Lend us your thread's purity so our creation achieves its full potential. In exchange, we grant you everything the Imperium denies: choice, autonomy, the ability to return home." Home. The word hit harder than any physical blow. Ryuko saw Earth in the pool's reflection, saw Hanoji, saw Mako and her family, saw everything she'd been fighting to get back to since waking in this hell. "Just say yes," the cantor whispered. Such a small word for such great reward. Senketsu blazed with warmth against her shoulders, his consciousness flooding her mind with warning and rejection. This wasn't truth. It was corruption wearing truth's face, promises built on lies, freedom that would cost everything that mattered. "Hey," Ryuko said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Want to know what I learned fighting people like you?" The pale cantor tilted its masked head. "Enlighten me." "Perfect things break," Ryuko said. "They break because they're rigid, can't adapt, can't change. They just keep being perfect until something stronger comes along and shatters them." She felt the collar's threat in her neck, the tracker's presence, the suppression protocols designed to keep her controlled. All the chains the Imperium had wrapped around her, and she smiled sharp and vicious. "Senketsu and I aren't perfect. We're rough, crude. We make mistakes and fix them and keep going. That's why we're stronger than anything you're building here." The cantor's grip tightened threads, cutting deeper. Defiance. How predictable. "Yeah," Ryuko agreed. "Predictable. Just like this." She let herself fall into the collar's activation, embracing the pain instead of fighting it. The neural shock that was meant to incapacitate her became fuel raw energy she channeled through her connection with Senketsu. The fabric responded, surging across her body in patterns that exceeded the suppression parameters, but moved too fast for the collar to fully react. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, she achieved partial transformation. Not full Senketsu Senjin, but enough. Enough for her strength to multiply. Enough for her to tear free of the pale cantor's threads. enough to drive her fist into that porcelain mask with force that shattered it into dust. The cantor screamed, the harmonic voice breaking into discordant shrieking as its form began to unravel. Threads whipped wildly, trying to maintain cohesion, but whatever intelligence had animated them was fragmenting without the mask's focus. The collar completed its activation. Ryuko's heart stopped. She felt it happen. Felt the cardiac arrest the device was designed to trigger. Felt her consciousness beginning to fade. But in that moment before darkness claimed her, she felt something else. Senketsu pouring his own life force into her through their bond, forcing her heart to beat again through sheer will. The collar couldn't stop that. Couldn't regulate that. It was designed to kill through mechanical means, but it had never accounted for a partner who would literally share his existence to keep her alive. Her heart started again, irregularly, painfully, but beating. Ryuko collapsed next to the pool, gasping for air, and watched through blurring vision as the pale cantor's form dissolved completely. The threads composing it fell into the lightless pool and vanished, leaving only empty robes behind. The cultists throughout the cathedral stopped moving. Without the cantor's guidance, they stood frozen like puppets with cut strings. Then one by one they collapsed, their own thread flesh unraveling, without the central intelligence to maintain cohesion. Kaid appeared beside her, his armor scorched and torn, but intact. He looked at the ruined mask fragments, at the dissolving cultists, at Ryuko barely conscious on the floor. "You killed it," he said. "Destroyed 17 months of their operation in under 5 minutes." "Loom," Ryuko managed, forcing the word past her raw throat. "Still active." Kaid looked at the massive structure still weaving, even without operators to guide it. The pattern was nearly complete, only a few sections remaining unfinished. He drew his bolt pistol and fired every remaining round into the loom's central mechanism. The device shuddered, threads snapping, the pattern breaking apart. The pool's surface began to churn, no longer perfectly still, and from its depths came sounds like distant screaming. Whatever it had been meant to summon or create that potential was dying with the loom's destruction. "We need to leave," Kaid said, hauling Ryuko to her feet. "This whole section is going to collapse when the ritual matrix fully destabilizes." Ryuko leaned against him, her legs barely supporting her weight, and let the Inquisitor guide her back toward the exit. Behind them, the cathedral began to shake, stone cracking, columns toppling, the loom tearing itself apart as energies it couldn't contain anymore ruptured through its structure. They ran through passages that twisted and buckled, pursued by destruction, spreading from the ritual's site like a shockwave. Ryuko felt Senketsu wrapped tight around her, his presence weaker than normal, exhausted from what he'd done to keep her alive. She wanted to thank him, to tell him they'd made it, but words required energy she didn't have left. The passage opened onto a junction where Skitari waited with Magos Halix 9. The tech priest's sensors swept over them, both data streams processing their condition. "Subject viable," Halix 9 announced. "Anomalous material viable. Mission parameters exceeded. Cult infrastructure destroyed. Casualties acceptable." "Get us out of here," Kaid ordered, already moving toward the lifter platform that would carry them back to the upper levels. The Skitarii formed an escort as they ascended the underhive's depths, falling away behind them. Ryuko watched through the platform's grating as the cathedral section collapsed entirely, taking the loom and pool and all the pale cantor's corruption with it into rubble and dust. She'd won. Destroyed the cult, survived another impossible situation through stubbornness and Senketsu's refusal to let her die alone. But the collar was still around her neck. The tracker was still in her blood. and the Imperium still owned her, at least as far as they were concerned. The victory felt hollow. Senketsu pulsed weakly against her, his consciousness barely present, and Ryuko closed her eyes. They'd figure out the next step later. Right now, survival was enough. It had to be enough. The medical bay smelled like antiseptic and machine oil. Ryuko lay on a slab identical to the one she'd woken on when this nightmare began, except now she was here voluntarily. Or, as voluntarily as anything got, when you wore a kill switch around your neck and had Skitarii standing guard at every exit. Mago's Helix 9 sensors swept over her for the fourth time in as many hours, data streams processing the damage the cathedral had inflicted. Cracked ribs, severe neural trauma from the collar activation, cardiac irregularities that made the medical servitor's alarms shriek every few minutes until the tech priest adjusted their sensitivity thresholds. Subject demonstrates remarkable recovery capacity. Halix observed metallic appendages adjusting IV lines that pumped fluids into her system. Accelerated healing beyond baseline human parameters. Probable synergistic effect between subject physiology and anomalous material bonding. Senketsu rested beside her on a separate platform, his fabric spread out like a patient awaiting examination. Cables and sensors covered him, monitoring systems Ryuko didn't understand tracking whatever passed for vital signs in sentient clothing. He'd been unconscious since the escape, his presence barely a whisper through their connection. "Is he going to be okay?" Ryuko asked, not for the first time. "Anomalous material exhibits energy depletion consistent with extreme exertion," Helix 9 replied. Biological analogs suggest cardiac restart protocols consumed a significant portion of available reserves. Projected recovery time 14 to 16 hours, assuming adequate nutritional supplementation. "You're feeding him glucose solution infusion via direct fiber absorption, crude but effective methodology." Ryuko closed her eyes and tried to reach for Senketsu through their bond. She found only exhaustion, the kind of deep weariness that came after pushing too far past all limits. He literally restarted her heart, forced her body to keep functioning through sheer will when the collar's programming demanded she die. She owed him everything. Again. The medical bay's door hissed open. Inquisitor Kalt entered, her armor still scorched from whatever she'd been doing while Ryuko fought the pale cantor. Behind her walked Inquisitor Kaid, looking considerably worse for wear, his scarred face marked with fresh wounds that would add to his collection. "Subject is stable?" Kalt asked Helix 9, not bothering to address Ryuko directly. "Affirmative. Full recovery projected within 72 hours. Anomalous material requires additional rest period, but shows no permanent degradation. Acceptable." Kalt turned to Ryuko. "Your performance exceeded projections. Cult leadership eliminated. Ritual infrastructure destroyed. Underhive corruption contained before spreading to manufacturing sectors. Minimal civilian casualties." "You're welcome," Ryuko said flatly. "Gratitude is unnecessary," Kalt replied. "You performed assigned function. Tools do not require thanks." Kaid stepped forward, his augmetic eye focusing on Ryuko with something that might have been respect. 17 months of investigation. 3 teams lost. Hundreds of hours compiling intelligence on cult operations. You destroyed it all in under 6 hours. "The loom wasn't finished," Ryuko said. "Another few days and whatever they were building would have been complete. You got lucky I showed up when I did." "Luck is heresy," Kalt stated. "The Emperor's will guided events to optimal resolution." Ryuko didn't have the energy to argue theology with people who thought their dying god emperor directed every coincidence in the galaxy. She focused on the more immediate problem, So what happens now? You got what you wanted? Cult's dead. I'm still here, still wearing your leash. What's the next impossible task you're going to throw at me? Cult and Cade exchanged looks, some institutional communication passing between them that Ryuko couldn't interpret. That remains under discussion, Cult said finally. Your utility has been demonstrated. However, your nature remains unclassified. Xenos origin, warp-resistant biology, technology that defies Mechanicus analysis. She paused. Such anomalies typically result in immediate purge protocols. But not this time, Ryuko guessed. Not yet, Cade corrected. You've proven valuable. Dangerous, yes. Unpredictable, certainly, but valuable. The Imperium has used for dangerous tools when properly contained and directed. More cults to destroy, Ryuko said. More impossible situations to throw me into and see if I survive. The galaxy contains infinite threats, Cult replied. Heretics, Xenos, corruption in forms we have not yet catalogued. Your unique capabilities provide options previously unavailable to us. Ryuko looked at Senketsu lying motionless on the examination platform at the collar around her throat at the guards watching from the doorway. She thought about the pale cantor's offer. Freedom, power, everything the Imperium denied, all for the low price of helping build something twisted and wrong from human suffering. She'd rejected that deal, chosen captivity over corruption. And now these people wanted to use her as their weapon, point her at threats and let her loose, knowing she'd either eliminate the problem or die trying. And if I refuse, she asked. You cannot refuse, Cult said simply. The alternative is termination. You and your anomalous material. Incineration and documentation as footnotes in inquisitorial archives. So my choices are fight or die. Everyone's choices in the Imperium. Cade said something almost apologetic in his tone. We survive by serving. We serve by sacrifice. Freedom is a luxury this galaxy cannot afford. Ryuko sat up despite her body's protest, ignoring the medical servitor's alarmed beeping. Where I come from, people fought for freedom. Died for it, bled for it. Because being alive without being free isn't really living. Philosophical debate is inefficient, Hallex 9 interjected. Subject's ideology irrelevant to operational parameters. Cult gestured toward Senketsu. Your attachment to the anomalous material provides sufficient leverage for compliance. You will perform assigned tasks. The material remains intact. Refuse, and we incinerate it before terminating you. Simple calculus. The threat landed like a physical blow. They'd kill Senketsu, burn him to ash and atoms because he didn't fit their narrow definition of acceptable. And they'd make her watch before killing her too. You're monsters, Ryuko said quietly. We are survivors, Cult corrected. In a galaxy filled with worse monsters than you can imagine. Sentiment is weakness. Mercy is heresy. Compassion invites corruption. She moved closer, her skull helm inches from Ryuko's face. You will learn this, or you will die. These are your only paths. Before Ryuko could respond, before she could tell this zealot exactly what she thought of her philosophy, alarms shrieked through the facility. Not medical alerts, something deeper. Threat warnings. Cult's head snapped toward the door. Report. A Skitarii appeared in the entrance, his Vox grill crackling with static. Underhive Section 749, experiencing catastrophic structural failure. Multiple collapses spreading toward inhabited zones. Estimated casualties in the thousands if progression continues. The cathedral collapse, Cade said. Ritual matrix destabilization must have weakened surrounding infrastructure more extensively than projected. Evacuation protocols, Kalt demanded. Ineffective. Transit routes compromised by collapse sequence. Lower-level populations trapped. Thousands of people, trapped in the underhive as the city collapsed around them. And these people were discussing it like a logistics problem, calculating acceptable losses, weighing the cost of rescue against the expense of simply writing off entire sections of population. Ryuko swung her legs off the examination slab, yanking IV lines from her arms. We have to help them. Subject is in no condition for deployment, Hallex 9 stated. I don't care. Ryuko stood fighting down the dizziness that threatened to drop her. People are dying. We can save them. Rescue operations in unstable underhive zones require extensive resources, Kalt said. Resources better allocated to protecting functional infrastructure. The lower levels serve minimal productive purpose. They're people, Ryuko said. Not resources, not tools, people. Inefficient distinction, Hallex 9 replied. Ryuko looked at Cade, hoping to find something human in at least one of them. The scarred Inquisitor met her gaze for a long moment, his augmetic eye whirring softly. The girl is right, he said finally. Those citizens pay tithes, contribute labor. They're Imperial property worth preserving. Not the response Ryuko wanted, but close enough. Kalt was silent, calculations running behind her expressionless helm. Very well. Limited rescue deployment. Subject will accompany Skitarii teams to assist in civilian extraction. Failure to comply with protocols results in immediate collar activation. I need Senketsu, Ryuko said. Anomalous material remains non-functional, Hallex 9 observed. Ryuko moved to the platform where her partner lay, pressing her hand against the fabric. Through their connection, she felt exhaustion, but also something else. Awareness. Senketsu was listening. I know you're tired, she said quietly. I know you need rest, but people are going to die if we don't help them. Just a little more. Then you can rest as long as you need. The fabric stirred weakly. Warmth bled through their bond, carrying determination that matched her own. Whatever reserves Senketsu had left, he'd spend them. Because that's what partners did. They showed up when it mattered, no matter the cost. Ryuko gathered him carefully, feeling him settle across her shoulders with familiar weight. Not full strength, nowhere close, but present. Together. Let's go save some lives, she said. The Skitarii moved through collapsed passages with mechanical efficiency, their augmented bodies allowing them to navigate debris that would crush unmodified humans. Ryuko followed Senketsu, providing just enough enhancement to let her keep pace despite her injuries. Behind them, support servitors hauled cutting equipment and stabilization gear. They found the first survivors 300 meters down, trapped in a HABS section that had partially collapsed. 18 people, mostly workers and their families, huddled in a space that grew smaller as the ceiling continued to buckle. The Skitarii began cutting through rubble with precision, but too slowly. The structural supports were failing faster than they could work. Can't we just blast through? Ryuko asked. Explosive force would accelerate collapse, Vorn replied, his respirator steady despite the dust choking the air. Standard extraction protocols require methodical approach. Standard protocols will get these people killed. She pushed past the Skitarii Senketsu, extending across her arms to provide strength her exhausted body couldn't generate alone. She grabbed the largest piece of rubble blocking the survivors and pulled muscles screaming collar-threatening activation at her neck. The debris shifted. Not much, just enough to create a gap. Now! She shouted to the trapped civilians. Move! They scrambled through the opening one by one, children first. Ryuko held the rubble in place, feeling Senketsu straining with her, both of them pushing past limits that should have stopped them. When the last civilian cleared, she let go and collapsed. The Skitari carried her and the survivors toward the surface. They found more groups, extracted them using the same brutal approach. Ryuko, becoming a human brace, holding collapsed sections stable long enough for people to escape. Each time nearly killed her. Each time Senketsu refused to let her fall. By the time they reached the surface, 73 civilians had been saved. A fraction of those lost in the collapse. But 73 people who would see tomorrow because she'd been stubborn enough to try. Ryuko sat on the edge of the landing platform as medics attended to the survivors, watching Vespera Hive's poisonous sky and trying to remember what clean air tasted like. Senketsu rested against her, his presence barely detectable through their bond. She'd pushed him too far again, pushed herself too far. But they'd done it, saved lives in a galaxy that seemed determined to throw them away. Colt appeared beside her, silent as a ghost, in power armor. You exceeded operational parameters again. People needed help, Ryuko said. 73 saved. Approximately 4,000 lost. Statistically insignificant impact. Tell that to the 73. Colt was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice carried something that might have been the ghost of respect. You cannot save everyone. This Imperium is too vast, too broken. Individual compassion means nothing against institutional decay spanning 10,000 years. Maybe not, Ryuko agreed. But I can save someone. That's enough. The Inquisitor turned to leave, then paused. Your next assignment will be significantly more dangerous. Cult activity on a forge world. Mechanicus involvement suspected. Higher mortality projection than previous deployment. Once anomalous material achieves functional recovery, estimated deployment 14 days. Colt began walking away, then stopped once more. Your defiance remains inefficient, but occasionally effective. Continue performing assigned functions. Your leash may yet extend. She left Ryuko alone on the platform, watching the Hive City's endless sprawl and thinking about freedom, about choices, about what it meant to fight for something when you were owned by people who saw you as a weapon. The Pale Cantor had offered escape. Power. Everything she'd lost. The Imperium offered only chains and impossible tasks and the certainty that she'd eventually be discarded when her usefulness expired. But Senketsu was still with her, still alive. And as long as they were together, as long as they kept refusing to break, there was a chance. Not freedom, not yet, but a chance. In the grim darkness of the far future that had to be enough. Ryuko closed her eyes, feeling Senketsu's exhausted warmth, and waited for whatever hell they'd be thrown into next. The story of the girl who wore thread wasn't over. It had barely begun. 3 months after the Pale Thread's destruction, whispers spread through Vespera's underhive. Stories of the girl who fought with fabric that lived, who shattered a cult the Inquisition couldn't touch, who died and came back through sheer refusal to quit. Gang leaders carved her symbol into territory markers. Workers painted crude icons showing a figure in red and navy standing against the darkness. They called her the Threadbreaker, the one who proved that even the Imperium's chains could be resisted. The Ordo Hereticus classified such veneration as incipient heresy. Inquisitor cult, had the icons destroyed, the storyteller's silence, the symbols purged. But the idea persisted, spreading through the hive's lower levels like infection through rotting flesh. Not worship. Something more dangerous. Hope. The possibility that someone could fight the system and survive. That crude, imperfect resistance could triumph where perfection and control failed. Ryuko remained in custody collar, still locked tight, moving between facilities, as the mechanics studied what they couldn't understand. And the Inquisition debated what they couldn't destroy. She'd left her mark, small, localized, temporary. But in the grim darkness of the far future, even temporary hope burned bright enough to matter.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.